Hey everyone, today we're going to do a tutorial on how to set up a sit-down on-camera interview. We're going to do the interview in this location, but we're going to talk about how to apply the principles to wherever location you are at. When you're setting up an interview to be on camera, you have to think about not only the visuals, but definitely the audio and the environment. So in terms of the environment, it's important to pick a place that makes sense for your story. So for example, we're in the Columbia Graduate School of Journalism, and if I was doing a story about a professor or a student, this might be a very appropriate location. It's a classroom and it makes sense visually with the editorial. Or if I was doing a story about an auto worker, perhaps I can do it in at the factory or in the office of the auto shop. So that makes sense as well. That's not always possible, but when you're looking for locations to shoot, that's definitely something to look out for. Secondly, you want a location that's big enough for all the gear that you're going to have. You're going to have obviously you and your source, but also you're going to have a camera, tripod, and often you're going to have external lights. So we're going to need a space where you can bring enough gear here. Luckily in this classroom, it's pretty big. We won't have that problem, but you may be in a situation where you have a small office or small conference room. So the more you can plan and the more you can find a location that fits physically, all the pieces required for your interview, the better. Once you've settled on your environment, the most important thing once you're actually in the environment to think about is audio. And not just the audio of your source, but the audio in terms of the environment. In this room, it's relatively quiet, but if you notice, it's a big room, and when I talk, you're going to hear echo. So you want to avoid that. And unfortunately, in this situation, I have this room, and I'm going to have to deal with it, but you have to make sure that you understand what you're getting so you can mitigate a lot of those issues later. Secondly, we're on Broadway in New York City. It's a very loud location, and right outside that window are taxis and cars and buses going by. You may have to close windows, you may have to turn off things such as appliances. So pick a location that makes sense editorially if you can, it matches with your story. Pick a location that's big enough to fit all your gear and all your sources and you in it, and really be concerned about the environmental noise in the rooms. What I want to do is isolate really clean, clear audio from my source. So that's the first consideration in terms of setting up your sit-down on-camera interview. Once you've determined where you're going to conduct your interview, then you have to determine where you're going to place your interviewee and your camera and yourself while you're conducting the interview. It's really important to get the best shot in the space that you've been provided. Now, the first thing I always do is really pick a background that makes sense, a background that's not too distracting or doesn't conflict too much with the main image. So examples of a really bad background might be a lot of messiness, a lot of junk behind your source to distract the viewer. If there's blinking monitors, that's always a bad situation because your viewer will be drawn to the blinking lights in the background. So we want something that's stable, consistent, almost muted, but with a little bit of character for your interview. So what I always like to do is put the interview source as far away from the back wall as possible. Again, the back wall is something I've chosen that looks good, that's not distracting, but I really want to move my source far away from the back wall as possible. So in this case, if I wanted the back wall to be that corner, I would set up my interviewee over here, closest to the corner opposite of it, just to get enough distance. Once I've created that distance, it's going to create nice blurriness in the background. So once I've set where I want the interview subject to be, I can start setting up my position for my camera and also the position for my source. Once you've determined where you want to place your camera and your source, you want to start manipulating the environment you're in to be able to set up all your gear. So in this case, I've come into a classroom, all the seats are lined up, but you may have to move these seats around to be able to get all of your gear in. So oftentimes you'll go into someone's small office, you may have to move a plant, you may have to move a desk. You don't want to corrupt the environment to change it into something completely different, but being a good producer requires you to make sure that you serve your viewer, which is to get a really good shot, and that often requires manipulating the space that you're in. So don't be afraid to move things around. In this case, there's nice rows of chairs, but I'm probably going to have to clean out some of those chairs. I don't want to clean them all out because that might be a nice background. The seats going far into the distance. That might work for my editorial, but I still need to make room for my source. So now you've seen I've moved some of the stuff around in this classroom right here. Before there were rows of neat neat rows of desks right here. I had to move things around because I needed to position my interview subject in this chair to get the desired effect in terms of a background that I liked for my subject, and also pulling the subject away from the background so there's a little bit of separation or blurriness so it's not conflicting with the sharp image that I want in my interview subject. Also, you notice that Ron is sitting in a four-legged chair without any wheels, and the chair cannot swivel. This is really important. You don't want to place your interview subject in a chair that's too comfortable. You don't want to put them in an office chair that they're used to, swinging back and forth. You don't want to necessarily put them in a big, poofy living room couch, because those couches, your source can slide down. You want to contain your source to the frame of your shot, and the best way of doing that is using a firm four-legged solid chair. Also for yourself, it's important that you have the same type of chair for yourself, because also in your interview process, you may start to move as well. And if you start to move back and forth or wheel around, your interview may follow you with your eyes, and you're going to get a very distracting effect in your shot where the interview subject is looking left and right and left and right. So it's important to pick the right type of chair. If you're in someone's home, kitchen chairs are typically solid. If you're in someone's office, don't get the big executive chairs. Those are the comfortable ones. Get the conference room chairs. Anything that keeps your source in place. So I'm going to place my chair in front of my interview subject. So interview subject, there's the background. He's away from the background. He's not against the wall. Again, I'm going to stress that because you don't want to look like a passport photo where your head is right against the wall. Right here, how much distance do I want from my seat to my interviewee seat? Really depends on how much room you have. If you have quite a bit of room, you can move back a little bit, but I've been in spaces that are really tight where our knees are practically touching. So that's really dependent on how much room you have in your space. So you want to make, get a chair ready for yourself. Once you've positioned yourself and your source, what you want to do is position the camera. Obviously, if you're shooting with a partner, the partner can monitor the camera, can look through the LCD screen and really get a good shot. If you're conducting the interview and shooting yourself, which is very common these days, you're really going to want to put the camera in a place where you can actually view the image. You don't ever want to set the camera down, hit record, and assume that everything's okay. Things change. Your source will fall out of the frame, they might slouch down, or things might happen in the background that you just wouldn't notice that happens in the camera. Your camera might die, and so you really want to look at the LCD while you're conducting the interview. And in this case, I'm going to assume that I'm conducting the interview by myself. I'm going to set the chair here, and I'm going to grab my camera right here, and I'm going to decide whether I want to shoot from the left or the right side of my source. Now, does it matter? No, because during the course of your video production, some sources might be shot from the left, some sources might be shot from the right, but it's important that you get the angle right. And what I mean by that is I never want to shoot too far to the right of my source because I'm going to get too much of a profile. So what I typically start off with is, about 25 or 30 degrees offline if I'm assuming this is my chair. So it's just a little bit offline from my source. There are other ways of framing your subject, but we're going to talk about really traditional, conventional sit-down interview style that you've seen in numerous video pieces or documentaries. So in this case, I'm going to set the camera over here, and I'm going to make sure that, where I'm sitting, I can still see the LCD on the screen. And in this case, I can. So I can conduct an interview with my source while every now and then looking at the LCD and making sure that I have a good shot. Once you have your source positioned in a chair in the space in the room that you want, and you have your camera set up on the tripod, you want to make sure that you've set up your camera in the right way at the right level. And what I mean by that is that you never want to have a camera that's too high or too low. You want to line up the camera to your source's eyes typically. And what I mean when I say that, you should never shoot a camera pointing down or tilting too much. There could be a little bit of tilt, but mainly you want to make sure that your camera is level and positioned in a way where if you drew a straight line, you're going to come across to your source's face. That's really key for getting a well-positioned shot for your interview. And once I've done that, I can start positioning and framing my shot. I can also start dealing with microphones and lighting. Once I have my source position, my camera position is at the right level, what I want to make sure now is I get good audio. Most cameras have some built-in microphone, or you might see a shotgun microphone, but typically for an interview, you're going to use one of these type of microphones, these lavaliers. You've probably seen them before. They're the clip-on mics that go right onto your source's shirt. The reason that we want to use these is that by clipping this microphone onto your source, you're going to keep that consistent distance between your source's mouth and the microphone. What you want to do is, for good, clean audio, is get your microphone as close to the source as possible, but also you want to avoid movement, meaning if I have a shotgun pointed at my source and my source moves back 6 inches, well, I'm going to lose that audio quality. If he moves forward, I'm going to lose the audio quality. If he moves to the left, I'm going to lose that audio quality. With this clipped-on mic, it's going to sound consistent throughout the course of the interview. Now, lavalier mics come in 2 main flavors: wired, which is this, and a wireless set, which is what I'm actually wearing right now. So they work the exact same way. It's just a different bit of technology. The wired lavalier has some advantages. You're going to have fewer parts to deal with. Every time you're dealing with gear and there's more components, there's more points of failure. So with this microphone, I just plug it into the camera and I can start recording. Now, with the wired lav, you're tethered to your source. So this particular microphone has about 8 to 10 feet of cord. So I physically have to be within 8 to 10 feet of my source. The other type of lavalier mic is the wireless, which I'm wearing right now. It consists of this microphone. I probably just bumped it and you heard it. And it goes to a transmitter pack that is connected to the camera, which is right over there. And so there is no limitation, reasonable limitation in terms of how far I can get away with the camera. Eventually, of course, I'll lose the signal, but if I'm in 50 feet away, it's still going to work great. But some downsides with a wireless microphone is that you may pick up radio static, you may pick up static from cell phones, batteries might run out, so there's a lot of potential places for error in a wireless microphone. So in the most part, if I can do it, I'll use a wired microphone for my interviews. And all I have to do that is first clip this on to my source. Now, I want to hide the mic as much as possible. If you have a big mic sticking around, sometimes it becomes distracting. And just on a personal level, I find that aesthetically not pleasing. So I want to clip this microphone in a way that it doesn't obstruct the shot, but I want to make sure that's close enough to get a really high quality audio recording. Now, how close should I have the mic to my source? Anywhere between 6 to 8 inches from the source's mouth is typically good. You don't want to get it too close. If you have it too close where you're clipped, the microphone's clipped somewhere around here, sometimes you run into the danger of picking up rubbing noises on someone's skin or someone's shirt. Also, there's this proximity effect where if it's too close under my chin, it's going to sound really booming. So that's a downside. If my microphone is too far away, I'm going to have to turn up the gain on my camera and pick up all this room noise. So I want to make sure around 6 to 8 inches is pretty ideal for picking up high quality sound of your source, and it kind of eliminates a lot of the room noise. Again, in this room, it's kind of noisy. When I'm interviewing in an environment that's not ideally quiet, I want to really eliminate as much of that sound as possible, and getting the microphone close to my source is key. So now I have my source here and he's ready to be mic'd. He's wearing the perfect shirt to be mic'd. It's buttoned. I can clip this onto his shirt easily and disguise and hide the cable. Sometimes your sources will wear a t-shirt, and that's harder because it might be a t-shirt that comes up to here and it's going to get too close to your source's mouth. So what you want to do is, if possible, have your source wearing a jacket, a button-down shirt. Obviously, you don't want to dictate what your source wears, but if they're wearing something like this, it's perfect. And in this case, I'm going to ask Ron to slide this part down his shirt. You can slide that down there, Ron. Pull it through your shirt and see how his button right here, this is less than 6 inches away from his chin. So I might unbutton this shirt right here, have Ron pull this through, and I want to make sure that I clip my mic right there. And now if you notice, my microphone is somewhere about 6 to 8 inches away from my audio source. That's about 6 inches right there. You don't have to be precise, but if it's too close, you'll start to hear that rumbling kind of sound. And if it's too far, you're going to pick up a lot of background noise. So I'm going to clip Ron's shirt right there and have the mic clip right there. It's in a perfect position for picking up high quality audio. Now, the other end of this simply just plugs into your camera and the XLR input. So I'm gonna just plug it right into my camera here, and I'm ready to start recording. So the first thing I wanna deal with is composition. In this case, right here, I want to have the traditional interview setup where Ron is talking to me, the interviewer, a little off camera. You can have Ron looking into the camera. There's issues with that, but we're going with the traditional interview style for this tutorial. So right here, I would be sitting in this chair. Ron would look over here, and I would start framing my shot. And you can see in my camera here, Ron is looking off camera. And with Ron right here, what I want to do is I want to use a rule called the rule of thirds to frame my subject. So what that means is positioning your subject in the frame in a way that is a third over from one side and a third down from the other side. So in this case, what I don't want is to have Ron in the center right here. What I want is Ron to be a third over and a third down. And in this case, it looks pretty good. It's framed in a way that it's a very traditional interview setup. And I want to make sure that if I'm sitting here, he's looking not just a little bit off camera, but not too much. How far do I zoom in? It doesn't really matter. It's really up to the editorial mission of your piece. If I'm zoomed out a little bit, it's going to pull me away from my source, so that might feel like there's a distance between me and my interview subject. Also, if I pull out too much, there might be distracting elements in the background. In this case, there's a couple windows are open. That becomes very distracting. If I zoom in a little bit more, it becomes very intimate. I get a really good sense of what Ron looks like, and I've eliminated all these little extra things from the background just so the viewer can focus on Ron. Now that covers composition. The next thing I want to do is concentrate on lighting. So this shot is composed well, but a few things are weird here. You know, Ron looks very dark in here. He's not popping out from the background, and he's not, the colors look too bluish. So I want to light Ron and then make sure that his white balance is correct. After setting up your microphone and composing your shot, you want to make sure that you have your shot well lit. Natural lighting is really nice. There's nothing better than the quality of sunlight hitting an object or hitting a source, but oftentimes you don't have that control of sunlight. You'll be in an office, a really dimly lit conference room, and you want to make sure that you light your subject so that your subject pops out is the key element in the shot. So the first thing you'll notice here that Ron is composed, but he's too dark in the image. I can turn up my ISO in the camera if I need to and make the image brighter. But what happens when I turn up my ISO is everything gets brighter, Ron and the background. So when I want to just make Ron pop out from the background, I want to isolate the light. And I'm going to have to use an external light to do that. And in this case, I have one set up. It's an LED light. There's different types of lights on the market. And the first key thing is I want to make sure I light Ron from an appropriate angle. So again, if I'm standing here to interview Ron and the camera's here on my right side if I'm facing Ron, my first light is going to be on the left side, on the opposite side of the camera. And this light is often called the key light. It's the first light that you're going to use to light your source. So right here, with this key light, I'm going to put it on the opposite side of this camera. I would be sitting somewhere right there. So over here, I'm going to turn on this light. And if I turn on this light right here, you notice that Ron is lit in the camera. Now in my shot, he looks very blue. There's a bluish tinge to my shot, and the reason being is that I haven't properly white balanced yet. That's okay, we're gonna do that. Our main thing is making sure that Ron is properly exposed in the shot. So right here, if I'm looking at my camera, it looks like he's a bit overexposed right where the light is hitting him. Right here, he's a little bit overexposed. Now, I can start manipulating my light by turning it darker or lighter. If I turn it darker and then lighter, you notice that it has a different effect on the exposure on his skin. Now, not all lights have dimmers, so the way you get around that is if you need the light softer and you don't have a dimmer, is just bring the light further away from your source. If you want it more intense, bring it closer to your source. But a lot of modern light setups now have a dimming switch, and I can turn this on and off to make sure that the light is properly exposed. Now, I want to make sure that I'm controlling all the light in the environment. Now, in this room, I have the lights that I brought, I have the ceiling lights in this room, and then I have the lights from the windows. So really, I'm only controlling currently 1 out of 3 light sources. So I want to have the most control out of my light as possible. So what I can do is turn off or minimize the other lights in the room as needed. In this case, I'm going to try to turn off the ceiling lights here and see what effect that has in terms of being able to control the light that falls onto Ron. So I'm going to turn off the ceiling light here. Once I turn off the ceiling light, you'll notice that Ron's not overexposed anymore, but also the room is pushed further in the background because not all of the room is lit. Only the part of the room where this light is shining on is lit. And right now it's currently focused on Ron, so he is popping out of the shot more than he did before when the entire room was lit. So this is controlling the environment right here. So in this case, if you notice, in this shot, he looks good, but everything's blue because we haven't white balanced yet. But if you only use one light on your source, you notice that it'll cast shadows, right? So right here, this side of his face is very well lit, but over here, there's some really dark shadows. Sometimes you could use this to dramatic effect, depending on the story that you're trying to tell. There might be, a court case or a bit of mystery or a bit of intrigue in your story, and that might work depending on your story topic. So in this case, if you want that, I would just leave one light, and it's very dramatic in this lighting. If you want it to be more even, what we're going to have to do is put a second light over here to balance out these shadows. Where I have my first key light over here, my second light is going to be on the other side to the side of Ron. And often this light is called the side light for that very reason. Sometimes it's called the fill light because I'm going to be filling in the dark areas of his face right here. So I'm going to grab another light right here. If you notice, I'm going to move my environment, move this chair because I need a little bit more room, and I'm going to turn this light on. Ron pops out of the background like he did not before. So now I have Ron properly framed, properly lit the way I want it, but now he still looks bluish, and what I want to do is white balance this shot. Currently the camera is thinking that I'm shooting in tungsten light or light in this room. What I need to tell the camera is that I'm actually using daylight balanced light, which is what these lights are. So if I go into my camera settings and I change the white balance to daylight, you notice that Ron no longer looks blue. He looks more natural skin tone. I can modify this with my camera a little bit so that he looks a little bit more human and less than that sickly blue. And in this case right here, when I do that, I have Ron who's well lit, he's popping from the background, and his skin tones look natural. He's properly exposed because I'm checking my zebras, and I'm ready to conduct my interview. So I have the mic 6 inches away, I have him positioned in an angle that makes sense with the camera, I have him looking into the frame using the rule of thirds, I have a key light that separates Ron from the background. I don't have anything distracting coming out of Ron's head in the background. The background has some meaning because it's in a classroom, and I think you can see some chairs in the background in my shot, but there's nothing distracting the viewer from Ron. So there you have it. That's how you set up an on-camera interview. Those are the steps you want to go through. And just so to review, the first part is your environment. You want to pick a room, a location that makes sense editorially, if possible. Also, you want to pick a place that has minimal noise. Oftentimes, it's really smart to go into these locations and do a scout, see if the traffic's too loud, or see if the vents are too loud, or see, if, for example, if you're interviewing a chef and they want to be interviewed at their restaurant, maybe it's too loud and too distracting to record there. Once you've determined your location, what you want to make sure is that you set up the interview with all the gear in an appropriate way. You want to identify where you place your subject, and you want to place your subject in a position where there's a nice clean background that's not distracting, that may have some additional editorial value. In this case, we're in a classroom. If Ron was a student this would make sense, or if Ron was a professor, this would make sense in terms of the interview. Once they've been positioned, you want to make sure that your camera is set up in a way that gets a really nice composed shot. The first step is obviously lining up your camera to eye level of your source. What you don't want to do is shoot down on your source or up at your source. And you want to frame your source using the rule of thirds. Finally, you want to mic your source 6 to 8 inches away before you set up your lighting. Once all that's good, you can set up your lighting. Eliminate any extraneous light because you want to control the light in your room. So oftentimes turning off lights or closing blinds is one way of controlling external light. And once you've done that, you're going to bring in outside light or artificial light to highlight your source. One light is going to cast shadows. 2 lights is going to blend them out. But once you combine that together, you're going to have a shot that really pops. And that's it for this tutorial. Good luck with your interviews.